So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to a community conversation with the Town of Ossining. I'm Dana Lettenberg. I'm the town supervisor of the Town of Ossining, as many of you here know. And we have a member of our town board here, Jackie Shaw. Also, we have from the supervisor's office, Maddie Zahach, and Victoria Caffarelli, who is going to talk a little bit later about her hats that she wears in the town offices. And welcome to our Assemblywoman Sandy Califf, and we also have a past town board member, Kim Jeffrey here, past zoning board member, Jerry Gershner. We have a member of DJ and Chamber of Commerce, Johnny G.
You can't swing a cat without hitting the dignitary here tonight.
And Keith Gordon, who runs our Cedar Lane Arts Center. And next to me, swinging around with the camera, we have Michael Conti, who has been working with us on this project Forward, which is an initiative by the town that started out as part of a grant with Village of Ossining and the Town of Ossining with a municipal restructuring fund grant from New York State. And we brought Michael in to help us with public community engagement on the topic of how we could move forward to look at some of our offices and efficiencies. The grant originally was something that we had worked on with the village to look at how we could combine our forces for our highway and DPW department and our parks departments and find efficiencies in that. As we were moving forward, and one of the first pieces of that was looking at the elected office of highway superintendent. But the other, what we found as we were moving forward, the village asked us to sort of if they could take a step back and wait a little bit, and we would explore what we could do from the town perspective first to lay the groundwork for future work together with the village. So we had an opportunity because there were a couple of folks who were talking to us about not seeking re-election for elected office, not just in the highway superintendent position, but also in the town clerk position. And we had a recent retirement in the receiver of taxes position, and we kind of looked around at what was happening in New York State with these offices and saw that there were some opportunities for finding different ways to run some of these offices. So we took a look at the numbers, and we came up with a couple of scenarios that we thought might work to make these offices more efficient and effective, and also continue to be friendly to our constituents. And that would be to eliminate these three offices: elected receiver of taxes, elected town and village clerk, and elected highway superintendent, in the hopes that it would pave the way for us to consolidate office staff to make it operate better and for less money. Ultimately, we're trying to save taxpayer dollars. In the initial look, it doesn't look like it saves a whole bundle of money. The way that the municipal restructuring fund works, though, is that we can get more money for implementation, because a lot of times when you do implement these types of savings, there's upfront costs and expenses that make it look like it's going to cost more money. So the state has money to help offset some of those initial costs, and then going forward, eventually you will start to save money. So as I mentioned, with the grant, we thought that the best thing that we could do would be to talk to the community about this, engage the community in conversation, and get feedback. So we sent a postcard out to our 10,800 different parcels, and let them know that we had an online survey that we encouraged them to take. I did get one phone call, somebody who said he couldn't do it online, so we mailed it to him, and he filled out the survey and got back to us. And so we have had interaction with people who might not have felt like they could work online. But I'm going to turn it over to Michael Conti to discuss a little bit about survey results. And then after that, we're going to hear a little bit about some potential restructuring possibilities, what these offices might look like and how that might change. And then we're going to hear a little bit from Victoria Caffarelli, who's been working as our interim town village clerk and has also had some other experiences. So, Michael Conti,
So,
take it away.
thank you, Dana. No disrespect intended to Sandy, but you know, the function of government can be somewhat opaque to the average person. I mean, how things get done on a day-to-day basis. And so when we contemplated how to move forward with just providing information, we thought, you know, less is criticized, too much will be criticized, and I'm sure there are plenty of thoughts that have been and will be generated about that effort, but we erred on the side of trying to give as much information as we could. So we built a website, which I hope you got a chance to take a look at, that laid out a lot of the facts and laid out, I think in very objective terms, where our starting point was, meaning historically, there's been an effort because of the unusual nature, it's probably the best way of saying it, politically with the two villages in Briarcliff and the town. So we built that site, we alerted people, and they took a survey. You know, engagement's really hard. It's hard to get people out, especially when it's cold out. But we did get 177 folks who responded to the survey. Back at the end of October, I think, I did a presentation for the board, and a public presentation on those survey results. I don't think we were too, was it
November 7th.
Was it November 7th?
That sounds right.
November 7th.
Yes.
Broadly speaking, this was not a scientific survey. This was not where we looked at a voter turnout and said, here's the model, these are the kinds of folks we wanted. It was self-select, because we're at the very early stage and we're just trying to get a sense, a barometer really, if you will, of community reaction. We do that because, for the most part, we're looking for the big reactions, meaning, that's an awful idea, please stop now. That's where it's valuable, because we don't, A, have the money to spend on really true scientific polling, and we don't have the money to spend on getting mail into people's houses on a regular basis. It's a tough connection to make. So we did this survey. About, surprisingly, even though it was self-select, about half the people who responded were female, about half were male. We had a pretty ordinary and I think pleasant breakdown in terms of where people lived. Village of Ossining, unincorporated area, and Briarcliff, kind of corresponding to the way the population exists. The survey definitely tracked older. I think about 60% of the folks were over the age of 60. It tracked definitely older or deeply rooted in terms of folks living here for a long period of time, being more active governmentally. So the people who took part in the survey, there's 177 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, except if tomorrow we had an election on something ordinary, you know, I don't know what the results here are typically, but thousands upon thousands do not turn out, right? So it's indicative of the fact that these are influencers. These are people who are civic-minded. They were civic-minded enough to take a survey. They were civic-minded enough to go to a website that the town built and find out a little more about this. So with that in mind, we took from this survey these results to heart. And we said, for the most part, what people are saying is, I'm motivated by the idea of saving money. That's an important distinction. We're largely motivated to support the idea of the elimination of elected positions. And when I asked them in that survey why, what was their individual motivation, the first was that these shouldn't be elected positions. Followed very closely by, can we please save money? Now that's an important distinction too, because I think if you ask the average person on the street, they might not even know that those positions are elected positions. So those are probably the two biggest takeaways, and really with respect to the differences, because, you know, from a logistical standpoint, the highway superintendent position is exclusive to the unincorporated area, and only those folks get to ultimately render a decision on that. So we're able to disaggregate and see, okay, here's what the folks from the unincorporated area said about that position. Everyone within the town gets to cast a ballot, if you will, on the tax receiver position, the town clerk position. The results were generally the same in both cases. So are there concerns about quality of services? Yeah, but they were trailing the more motivating affirmative factors, meaning people would rather see this happen for the reasons that I just cited. That's their first and most profound response to this. And if there's a caution, it's, well, can we have some more details here? Because if I'm motivated against this, it will be because I think something's being taken away. And that's where, encapsulated in the report that I put together, I said it's time to have more face-to-face conversation with folks, because if you're going to do this, you ought to find out a little bit more specifically about what those objections are.
Okay. So now, Maddie Zahaj works in the supervisor's office. She is our budget director and also human resources director. And we've been working together to kind of figure out what different structures might look like for some of these departments. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I think most of the folks assembled here sort of know what the structure looks like, but just for the sake of those folks who might be watching on YouTube, I'll go through it a little bit more slowly. So we have two concepts that we were looking at. The first concept, concept A, has to do with the structure in the town highway department. So as it stands right now, we have an elected highway superintendent, we have 2 part-time clerical positions, and then we have the rank and file. So the gentleman who are plowing your snow, repairing your roads, so on and so forth. What we were working on as far as coming up with a dollar figure would be eliminating the job of the elected highway superintendent and all benefits that are attached to that. And the savings that we came up with was a modest savings. It wasn't a huge amount of savings, but I think we put it in the range of between 2.5% and 5% of the highway department fund annual budget, which again is modest, but it's a step in the right direction. And I know that a question that we've had a couple of times, both at the session this morning and then also when we've discussed this project with people, is, well, what happens? The highway superintendent is gone, who's going to take on that accountability? And the answer that we believe is going to be true is you won't really notice a difference. We're going to notice a savings. We can either reinvest that savings into the budget, so put the whole thing away, or we can take that savings and use it to reorganize the department. And some of the ideas that we had were either to provide a stipend to one of the other employees to do the daily administrative and organizational jobs, or perhaps do an intermunicipal agreement. We had a couple different ideas, but rest assured that if you place a phone call to the highway department, likely the same people will answer the phone. We don't really foresee much difference going on in the rank and file. We know the town loves their highway department. We don't really see anything changing. And what I was thinking about this morning is, it's almost as though you don't want to know that we exist. You want your garbage to get picked up, you want your roads to be clean. It's not something you should have to think about. You probably don't think about it now, and likely would not think about it under the new structure either. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on to other?
There was one other possibility that you had
Yes.
mentioned this morning, which was
Yes.
that if there was somebody who had retired from the position and couldn't make more than $30,000.
Yeah, so if someone's retired and they're under a certain age, they're only allowed to make $30,000 in public employment for so long as they're receiving a pension. So we know that we have a couple very recent retirees who know the ropes, they know our roads, they know our sewers, who may very well be interested in helping us out, in this state. So that's another option that we've considered. But certainly, all of the options we've considered would be appreciably less costly than the situation that we have right now.
And just to add to that a little bit, I would just like to say that this would be a step in the direction of potentially, again, as we discussed at the beginning, looking at broader efficiencies, and if there's a way for us to consolidate some of the work that we do in the town general, including our parks department, our cemetery, and our highway department, because there's so many overlapping functions that they have, and overlapping equipment and overlapping skills they have in common, that it would be an opportunity for us to find efficiencies just within our own departments. Not even talking about if we could then find greater efficiencies working with the village. And again, one of the things that we've talked about also is that even, again, as Maddie mentioned, even with all of those, with the change at an administrative level, you're still going to have the boots on the ground people. You still need to plow your roads. We're not getting rid of the people who are doing that work. And in general, when you look for efficiencies, you're looking at the top, not at the bottom, because that's where the work is done. You still have just as many roads. You're still going to need the trucks. You're still need the plows. You're still going to need the salt to go out and do all of that. So you want to go back to if there were any questions.
best time, I think, to make a lot of these consolidations or changes is when somebody's not running, because you're dealing with elected office. So are we dealing with a certain time frame that
Yes.
might be very helpful to work on this right now?
Yeah, so our current elected highway superintendent has expressed his desire not to seek re-election. I mean, could he change his mind? Yes, he could. But right now, his term is up at the end of 2019. The same is true for our clerk. And we recently had a retirement in our tax receiver, and the person that we appointed into the position, the town board appointed into the position, was then, that appointment was then endorsed by the voters who voted for her to continue as an elected receiver. Now, her term isn't up for until 2 more years, but she, when she came in, we had a discussion with her about the possibility of looking to eliminate elected offices, if that was something that the public would support. How would that feel for her? And she was fine with that. I don't think that, I know as a fact that she enjoyed speaking with all the people that you do speak with when you're going out, you're seeking election. And she loves her job very, very much. The person is currently in that position, but I don't think that she sees a difference from her perspective in being appointed versus being elected.
We go back to unincorporated highway superintendent?
Sure.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess my question, and I do know the structure, but I guess my question is, if we're taking out basically the person who is handling a lot of the administrative work, how are you plugging that with, because everybody else is a root zone, right? Everybody else is in, you talk about the highway superintendent, you're taking away that position. You're talking about taking away that position, not just not electing that position.
We're talking about finding a better way for that position
Okay.
to be filled.
So first we're talking about not making it elected anymore, but you're also talking about removing it. And my question is, if you're talking about removing that and removing the clerk who's part-time under it, because that's what I thought I heard.
Conditions have changed a little bit since we actually wrote the grant and project forward. Because at the time we had one part-time employee, now we have 2 part-time employees. We were expecting at one point to have a full-time employee in place of those 2 part-time employees. The staffing over there as far as administrative services is a little bit fluid at this point. But that was, you're correct, that was initially what was the proposal.
So I guess the question is, if you're taking away or proposing taking away this elected official and the actual job itself, my question is, who's stepping in to do listen, I don't work in that, but I know that the DEC is very serious about water and gutters and sewer and all these reports that, so who's doing that? Because if the guy who is fixing the trucks or plowing the roads or taking the garbage or the leaves, then we don't have the garbage, but if one of those guys is the one who has to do it, then you don't have efficiencies if you're taking away from what's needed. So that's my initial concern, is somebody who lives in the very place that we're talking about.
Can I just, maybe I
Yes.
wasn't clear, I apologize. So not having the rank and file, right now we have 9. Not taking one of the guys off the road for half a day every week and saying, have you do the paperwork. So if that's what I said.
No,
then
I mean, let's
I'll
clarify
correct it.
for the people who are
Right.
going to be
So,
thinking it in their
for
heads.
example, we've had a couple recent retirees in the highway department. Instead of the superintendent of highways who's making, with benefits, we can assume about $225,000, that's all in with benefits, that's not what he's earning. And replacing that instead with an administrative employee at $30,000 a year, who is one of these gentlemen who sort of knows the ropes. That's sort of what I intended to say. Not taking from the pool that we currently have, but rather rehiring one of those gentlemen who's already left.
Okay. I just want to say, I don't know what the survey looked like because I never actually saw the survey. So when we talk about community engagement, I truly, truly believe that 90% of the people have no idea this is happening. And of that percentage, there's going to be a percentage that really don't care. And then there's gonna be another percentage that are gonna be like, oh, that's a great idea. And then there's gonna be a percentage that's like, oh, that's not a good idea. And we don't know what that is yet. And I think that's what you're trying to say, is you're trying to figure that out. But this concept that 177 people saw it and self-did it doesn't tell a story at all yet. We don't know what it really is out there, because I have found that people don't pay attention until they have to. And they don't have to yet. It's not out there yet. It hasn't hit all of the Daily Voice and the Patch haven't been saying it. The Daily Gazette hasn't written. There haven't been a bunch of articles about it. LOHUD hasn't said anything. I haven't heard from David McKay yet, reading it. It hasn't hit the levels. And it's always hard to get information out, you're right. And it's always hard to engage. But I just think this is so new and everybody just doesn't know. So that I just have a hard time taking 177 people out of 10,000 parcels when I myself was fairly civic engaged and never saw that. I didn't see it. So I think a lot of people never saw it and so may not know. And plus, because of that, we don't know what the question, I don't know how you phrased it or what the question was to elicit whatever it is the response was that was given.
I don't disagree with you, by the way, because it is it's challenging, and I think people do wait until the very 11th hour before they get engaged in things. On a community basis, though, I would say that the earnest effort is the only effort, right? Mm-hmm. And this is an earnest effort. It's an earnest effort because, every parcel was at least, mailed something, which in and of itself is pretty significant, because that costs probably about $3,000 alone just to do that. And it's, when you had a grant of about $20,000, I mean, that's a big chunk of money to take out of a $20,000 grant. So
And it was in the press. It was
in the press. It was in the press, but still, people are generally going, look, I mean, it's all about conflict, right? In the end, what's interesting to people is conflict, not the relatively mundane, and certainly not the relatively mundane about government.
Or if they don't understand it yet, so they think it's like whatever.
Right, so there's an earnest effort here. You put that earnest effort out. There's a reciprocal responsibility, for people to be civically active as you are tonight, or at least to be civically observant. That's something that you hope for, and you continue that earnestness with what we're doing. But by no means does anyone think that there's a degree of certitude about 177 respondents in a self-select survey. As I said, it's a start.
And
It's a barometer.
we're taking the temperature, right? That's what much is.
Patty, I have long personally believed that we should only elect policymakers. We shouldn't elect administrators, technicians, call it whatever term you want. So I don't have a problem with unelecting the positions you're talking about. I do have a philosophy that if it ain't broken, don't fix it. And I can tell you the highway department ain't broken. As a town outside resident, I love it every time they come down my street with the street sweeper and clean the street. Or they come down and they vacuum the leaves. And I don't know, I live at Stonegate Road at the bottom. So it's up a hill and down a hill to get to me. And people come to my house and say, oh my God, what do you do in the wintertime? I said, let me tell you what I do in the wintertime. I said, the highway department starts plowing before it snows. They plow while it snows, and then they come and they mop the street afterwards. And that's what I love. And it ain't broken, don't fix it. And you need an administrator who is of an administrative, educated mentality, put it that way. And that's not to denigrate the troops. I'm not meaning to do that. But they're different positions. And
I don't think anybody's gonna just say.
no, but you're talking about taking one of the tradesmen, I forget what term I should
Rank
use.
and file. That's,
One of the
it's
rank
on
and
the
file,
yep.
and all of a sudden make them the administrator of this department that has a budget of how much money a year?
About $3 million.
3 million plus. You know, that's not insignificant. And I'm not saying that one of the rank and file or the tradesmen is not capable of it, but I think you're looking to fill a position like that with someone of a different level. And that's why if you're going to fix something, don't break it. If Mike is going to retire and it's probably time, and you want to appoint someone instead of, elected, that's okay. But I would hope that you would appoint someone who has administrative skills.
Absolutely.
That person may not know how to fix a leaking sewer pipe, but it's a different job.
Right. And honestly, you really do need to, we believe that you need to make sure that we have a list of established qualifications for a job description, and then we look for people who have those qualifications. And I think you're absolutely right. We're not going to put somebody in there who doesn't have the ability to administrate. Now, again, if you look around, we do have people in our midst who have the capability to fill those positions right now, and they could step right in. We know that we have people who could do that at a much reduced salary than our highway superintendent.
So that's part of the confusion. Because I'm having a hard time. Because on one hand, we're talking about no longer electing the position. Okay. Now we're talking about, on one hand, we're talking about eliminating the position, but then we're talking back about, no, putting somebody in just who's appointed. So I'm confused about what are we really talking about? And I think at the end of the day, I think we could talk about those things, but it's hard to hear that. I understand we're talking about like scenarios, but it's hard to then understand because, to Jerry's point, no offense to anybody who lives in Briarcliff or the village of Ossining, but the town of Ossining has the best darn plow roads out there. We do. Every time I come out of my road, I used to work in the village. I used to drive through Briarcliff to get there. I cannot tell you where I where I slipped and where I would almost get stuck, and never out of here. So I think the concern is not reducing personnel on a very slim department as it is, and then being clear about, okay, I get this not elected part. I don't understand. Are we appointing somebody? Are we not filling it? Are we trying to get somebody to fill in who's already there, and now that takes a guy out? Those are the concerns I would have as a resident.
Okay, so
we have a
sorry.
couple. Okay, so we just go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to very quickly respond. So the last one you mentioned, we've ruled out, right? As I mentioned earlier, we foresee having this savings, and we can do with it what we think is the right fit, and that's sort of why we're here, is to sort of figure out, what the concerns of the residents are. And certainly, to your point, I don't see any reason why one of those gentlemen couldn't come back, and we could have a part-time clerical person to help them with, the paperwork that they need. Because really what we've heard again and again is we want people who know the town, we have very specific needs, we want people who know our roads. One of those people could very easily do that, and if typing isn't their specialty, if paperwork isn't their specialty, we already have two very lovely clerical employees there. So we could certainly make that work if that was what the community felt was the right fit.
So give me a clue for a second. I'm not sure what.
Can I just give?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry.
Go.
Keith had a question, and I wanted to give somebody else a chance. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I
No
don't
problem,
mean
no problem.
First Dave.
So in general, I'm fully in support of reducing expenses. I don't see any reason to elect every position in the town. You elect the school board, you don't elect the superintendent, you don't elect the head of the transportation for the school district. And the same should go here. What confuses me is that if you no longer have the superintendent, part of that job, I would assume, is not administrative. It's not filling out reports to the state and so forth, or to your accounting systems. It's actually supervising the crew. So somebody has to have that job. No?
To a certain extent, you could say that, but we have an active foreman who who actually supervises the
Okay,
crew.
that's what I'm trying to ask.
Yes, we have
understand.
somebody in a position that says, okay, you know, today we're gonna go here and there, and we're gonna do the storm drains, and we're gonna clean those out, and we got, you know, our catch basins, we got our leaves that we have to pick up, we have, you know, all of, whatever, that there's brush over here, we need to sweep the streets, we have, you know, regular schedules for different functions that happen on, you know, a regular basis, and a lot of that stuff really happens at the foreman level of the job. So again, the boots on the ground, the day-to-day is happening a step below that superintendent position. So again, if the
So what
superintendent,
functions can we do without? I guess I'm trying to understand.
Maybe
The
just
superintendent
need to-
currently has a list of functions. What does he or she do every day that we won't need?
The superintendent is a person who does drive around, does check the conditions of the road. Like the people who are working on it, decide they're working on specific things. But the superintendent does drive around to see conditions of different things, point out situations, is the man on the phone when we go through storms, does bring, I mean, they is in the office and doing those things. There is, I know it because I see it. I mean,
okay,
I've
but
seen
we
it.
also have our police point out situations. So in other words, if there's an icing situation, oftentimes we find out about an icing situation because the police will let us know. When the snow starts to fall, we get a call.
I'm not relying on my police department to figure out my highway department issue. Like they may
I'm
work
just telling you
together.
that we
Go
get
ahead.
calls from constituents all the time, and so does the you know, the highway department. And the clerical staff is often the first one. Oftentimes, the superintendent is in the office because if we, you know, covering the phone. So first thing in the morning and at the end of the day, he's answering phones. He's talking to constituents. So that's oftentimes what he's doing. He's talking to people and, you know, again, taking phone calls.
There's one other question about, if I heard correctly, a large part of the savings is taking some people who have recently retired, are getting state pension, and therefore, if they're going to work for government, their compensation is capped at $30,000. And having them fill in some of the functions of the elected superintendent, who was paid a whole lot more.
That is an option.
Okay. That seems to me to be a pretty short-term measure, because you're not always going to have those people. And if the purpose of this is an interim step toward
Yes.
something further
It is.
on a little bit grander scale,
Sure.
then it makes sense.
So let's go back to the beginning of the conversation, right, where we started, which was, where did we start? How did we start to talk about this municipal restructuring grant? We started talking to the village of Ossining and looking at ways that we could work together. Maybe we don't need to have 2 salt sheds. Maybe we could have 1 salt shed. Maybe we could have 1 joint facility. Or even if we had 2 facilities, if we had, you know, an overall reduction in top level staff, but not really reducing boots on the ground, not reducing the number of trucks, not reducing the number of, not taking away our current outsourced refuse pickup. You know, this is a direction that we're moving towards. This is a step in that direction. So we don't necessarily believe it's the long-term solution. We think it's a step in a direction of finding greater efficiencies by working with our village partners.
Manny, as the resident number cruncher, the highway department budget was about how much?
I want to say it's between 3 and 3.5 right
Okay,
now. It's
so
a
let's
blended
say that
tax rate
range.
between that and the 200.
How much money would we be saving if we implemented this? And what percentage of it would it be of the total town outside budget? And how much am I going to save as a town outside taxpayer? I don't want to save $10 or $25 or $50.
You might save
I don't wanna-
$25 or $50.
I don't want to save
That's-
it. I don't want to
I
save it.
understand.
I don't want to fix something that's not broken. I'd rather keep it. And if we had an extra person in the highway department, I love it. They
Well,
can
I'd
come-
rather
They can
them-
come up my
I'd-
street.
I'd rather an extra person in the Parks Department.
I don't, we'll get to that department too, okay?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
to answer your question,
Right.
what you've represented is probably not too far off. Like I explained, it's a pretty modest savings, because we would be really just taking that very big number of the one salary and using some of it to still fulfill those functions, but at a lower rate. So, say $150,000 round figures out of a $3.5 million budget, that's not much.
Nothing.
You're right, well, it's not nothing.
Well,
not
then divided
nothing.
amongst all
It's
the, of all the town outside taxpayers,
No,
it's nothing.
San Diego.
But I think you were saying that there are going to be maybe some other things that come along. Linda Puglisi, who's town supervisor in Portland, had a referendum to get rid of the elected highway superintendent maybe 20-some years ago. And she pulled together a department that, I mean, that's a town that has saved so much money and had such a level tax rate for so long. So there were a lot of different things that she was able to do. Now, I don't know whether you've reached out in any way to Cortland to see, it's a bigger
It's a
town.
much,
How
It's
are
a
their
bigger town.
roads? That's what I want to know.
You know,
Because they can save money, but if their roads are bad, then that's the
then you
problem.
have to ask, I haven't heard from people saying, they usually say state roads are bad, so that's a different issue.
that's
So,
your fault.
that's another one. But it just seems, I mean, I kind of think if you can, especially if the town and the village, I wish Briarcliff would be a part of it, can pull together some of these different aspects so that we can save money. It might be $10, and then the next year it's $50, and then it's $100. I mean, after a while, I mean, it is savings, and I think that's important to people. As long as you're getting the service on the road, it seems to me what we're hearing. I'm not in the town, I'm in the village, but the same people are going out to do the roads. They're getting rid of the snow and so on. Somebody who I actually heard tonight that there's a foreman, yes, that orchestrates this. I don't know if we looked at the superintendent of highways agenda for the day, maybe you have to look and see all the different component parts of what he's doing from 8 in the morning to whatever, and see what is missing. And you probably have done some of that to find out, where there might be some overlap or something that's not done, and then try to address it. I think we're in a world where we have to be challenged by, I'm sorry, Jerry, change sometimes can be really, really good. And in Cortland, change was really, really good. So
I as much as I'd love to keep talking
Yeah,
about the
so,
highway
highway.
department, I want
Right.
to talk a little bit about the receiver of taxes and the clerk's office as well. That's an office that we have two offices. One right currently is on the first floor of 16 Croton Avenue, and one is on the third floor. And we have a staff downstairs that's expanded and contracted over time a little bit, depending on who maybe held that elected office and what they thought their needs were. Same with the third floor with the receiver's office. And some of that was based on the needs of the particular people who were in those elected offices and made their case very well to the town board to have greater or lesser coverage. Sometimes there was a little back and forth fighting for a little turf war, because one department said, well, the other department has this many people and we want to have that many people. But overall, there's been ups and downs in those both departments. Right now, what we have is on the books, we still have we have a receiver of taxes, 2 deputy receivers of taxes. One a position is not currently filled, and we have a part-time person in that office. And in the clerk's office, we have right now we have an elected clerk who's out for health reasons right now, and has been for some time. We have an interim clerk, we have a deputy clerk, and we have a person in there part-time. So again, we saw this maybe as an opportunity because our current clerk had indicated that she was not planning to seek re-election. And we happen to have a person filling the role, Victoria Caffarelli is filling this role as interim clerk now part-time. She's also part-time in the supervisor's office. But she's had an experience in a different municipality and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that experience.
Sure. So before I started working for the Town of Ossining, I worked for the Town of Newcastle for 3 years in the what is a shared town clerk and tax receiver department. There is one appointed town clerk, tax receiver, and a deputy receiver of taxes, a deputy clerk, and a few other clerical staff, again, similar to what's happened in Ossining. That's kind of gone up and gone down a little bit over the years. But largely this structure's been in place for about 15 years in the town of Newcastle. And what's really great about it is that the two offices kind of mesh nicely. The busy times they don't really overlap. So parking, you have your parking permits coming in December, and then just as that kind of goes down, you have tax collection in January. And what's nice about that is that you go from having 2 separate departments with a few people to having a department of possibly 5 staff members that can really help the residents when they need it the most. When you have 1 million people online waiting to pay their taxes, you have 5 people at the ready to help them. But largely, similar to that of the highway department, the day-to-day functions of those positions most likely won't change. It's just when you really need people to pitch hit and kind of come in and help on these busy days, you have at the ready a lot of hands ready to help serve the residents. So, I think in Newcastle that structure has worked out very well. I think the residents are happy with the service that they are provided with, and they've always had a very competent, good person serving in that role that can really address the needs of the community.
So I have some questions.
Sure.
Does anybody know what the population of Newcastle is versus Ossining?
It's geographically bigger.
No, the population is not bigger.
It probably has more parcels. It's geographically bigger than.
I'm talking
population. I'm not sure. It's probably pretty comparable.
Okay.
Yeah,
How many school districts do they have?
a lot more than we do. Probably close to 5 or 6
They have 5 or 6 school districts.
school districts. Yes.
So I guess I have concerns about those 2 positions not being elected more than the highway. And the reason my concerns are, and I'm open to hearing why, but the receiver of taxes to me should be an independent position from the office of the supervisor, based on the fact that they are in charge of receiving the taxes, based on the fact that they are in charge of issues regarding penalties, and based on the fact that you don't know who's going to be in the position 5 or 10 years from now, where I also am concerned about what could be cronyism, what could be nepotism, but mostly I'm concerned about independence. And I think for the town clerk, my concern is that that is the person who certifies elections, and it is also the person who's supposed to be in charge of FOIL responses. And to me, those things are things that should be under the person. So to your point about administrative people shouldn't be elected, or it's never, or your thing, those 2 positions to me should be independent of anybody who can influence them based on the nature of the job that they do. And I'm concerned, I'm always concerned about taking away people's ability to elect. It concerns me. But taking away the ability to elect positions that seem to need to be independent based on possibilities, I think that concerns me more than anything. Whereas the superintendent of highway, a foreman in charge, if you're not taking away a boot on the ground, if my roads are going to be plowed, if we can get the same service, then, and we're not breaking what's fixed, I can see it. I'm looking at these positions, I was blindsided. but I'd never heard of it. I never knew that the town was thinking of it. I thank you for explaining what your background is, because I didn't understand why the person who is the deputy in the town clerk's office was not appointed the interim, but I understand that you have background. At least that's helpful to understand why, because she's been there for 10 years. But these to me lend themselves to be independent positions, and so I'm concerned about that aspect of it. And I'm not also sure how much money we're saving. So we're going to take those two positions.
We're going to combine the two offices.
I
We have
also-
one office, and the other benefit would be, I mean, just
No, I understand
physically,
combining
just
with,
just
wait, let me
physically,
just ask the question.
Okay.
Who's in charge in this scenario? I understand you're
a
combining
person that
personnel.
has a title of receiver/clerk.
So the receiver of taxes, though, is a specific background of knowledge. How does the background of knowledge of the receiver gel with the background and the work and the duties of the town clerk?
Yeah, something that I think is really essential to making this function is having a deputy tax receiver and a deputy clerk that really understand their functions, so that you can have a professional person who is the go-to person for all clerk things and a go-to person for all receiver things. And that's really how it does function in Newcastle. You have really great people serving in those roles. But at the same time, I think to fill the position of clerk or fill the position of tax receiver, I do think a lot of those qualifications work well together. That if you are somebody that likes dealing with the public, that wants to serve your community, that really is what it is at the heart of it. You're serving your community and you have pride in that. I think that's the most important thing that you can have in somebody that's serving in that position. So it's laws, it's the laws of a municipality, but I think really at the heart of it, if you have somebody who's passionate about it, it's really easy to learn both functions and understand. It's really about knowing the importance of them, less about knowing the nitty-gritty details, because you really have support staff that can help you with that. It's about respecting the laws, respecting the functions, and ensuring that that's done effectively and efficiently.
But then how does the person who's appointed speak to power? I mean,
What is it?
once again, we're talking,
Can we just,
Yeah.
you've had a lot of time, and I just want
Yeah.
to give everybody else an opportunity to speak and ask questions.
Well, I do want to just address one thing about the elections, is that, yes, the clerk is responsible for overseeing the local elections and responsible for coordinating it, but right now, the Westchester County Department of Elections is responsible for certifying the elections. The function of the clerk on election night is get the stuff, make sure it arrives in your office, all of the materials to you. We don't even get the official, we don't get the printouts from the machines. We don't get the official chips that hold the results. That all goes to the Board of Elections the night of the election. So what is left with the clerk for their responsibility is not what it used to be. So I would just like to say, I don't think you have to be concerned about having somebody that might cause any sort of issues with the election, because at the end of the day, it is the Westchester County Board of Elections now that really runs the elections for all the municipalities in Westchester.
Is there anybody else who wanted to comment on these other positions or have questions about the receivers?
It seems to me we might be minimalizing what the town highway superintendent really does. It's a position that requires a lot of knowledge of licensing, a lot of knowledge of a lot of the state and national laws. I know the current superintendent very well, and he's always attending training and doing things like that. So who is going to do that?
A person that you...
Well, yeah, but are you going to have the qualifications? He has a lot of qualifications.
Absolutely.
I've been with him during the day when he's had to answer 5 or 10 or 15 phone calls with knowledge at his fingertips. Can you appoint somebody like that? I don't know. Is there a civil service position for town highway? Or any type of a highway superintendent?
I think there is for Department of Public Works.
Yeah, so
Maybe-
would you then get from that pool?
absolutely could.
Yeah.
Well, but I don't know that as an unincorporated person, I want it going there right now. Like,
I'm s-
we're still talking about having an unincorporated town highway department. Now, it's one thing to say that maybe that position shouldn't be elected anymore. Maybe we're going to fill it with somebody who absolutely can handle. And it's one thing to say we might be sharing a salt shed, but a whole conversation about consolidation is a whole nother can of worms
I don't
that
think
needs
that's
to
what
be
you're saying.
discussed.
You're just saying a new job title for the person who's
I'm just
responsible for
saying,
the town.
I'm nervous
Well, he
that
said
that,
pulling somebody from the DPW, you can't do that from
Right.
the perspective of how we're talking.
well, what I'm saying is, I want to make sure that any person that's appointed has the qualifications of what we have now.
Well, right now, in an elected position, you can have 0 qualifications and be elected to the position.
But the people understand that.
But the people make
Well,
sure that
people
you are
understand.
qualified with
I-
You actually
I
go to
do.
trainings when you get elected.
Right.
If you haven't been trained, then you go to trainings, and you know who pays for
hasn't
that?
happened.
The town.
In this
Oh.
case, it has not happened.
Well, absolutely. When
So
when
now,
our current
this
superintendent of
position-
highways, he didn't come in with all that training. He's been, like you said, he's always going to trainings.
Always,
He-
yes.
That would be the same for anybody in that position. They would be going to trainings. They wouldn't stop going to trainings just because they were appointed.
I just don't think you can fill that position with a $30,000 employee.
Well, again, that was an example of an opportunity that we could look at, which would be to hire somebody who had retired and was not yet able to collect a full salary. So that is a possibility. It is not our only possibility, but it is an opportunity, certainly.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in a half hour.
I just am
Note,
still
the computers will be shutting down in about 15 minutes.
Just wait 1
Please
second.
save all your work.
Yeah, but see, and I saw Sandy, sorry.
No, I just, I've also heard other communities say, if you have all these elected positions, there's no opportunity to do any sharing of services, particularly because they are elected positions, they have a role, and you can't, if you wanted to do something, you couldn't. So if you want to keep it just as it is, then you keep the elected positions. But if you want to have some opportunities to negotiate, I guess, that happened with our police department, because they were not, our town police chief was not an elected person, right? So then the community was able to negotiate, whether you liked it or you didn't like it, but they were able to negotiate because they weren't elected. But when you have an elected receiver of taxes, you're kind of stuck. You can't do that combination at all when they're elected. So it doesn't give you the flexibility. I think there's so many people that, you said it before, that it's like professional people that have been really trained and schooled beforehand instead of, most of us started out not trained in our jobs that we have, right? We just did on-the-job training, but I think, if you were hiring somebody in receiver taxes, you probably want somebody that really knows, not receiver tax, but being able to coordinate it, that knows the state laws. They're very specific about receiver taxes. You can't pay late, you can't do this, you can't, there are a whole bunch of rules and regulations. It's very kind of cut and dry. Cut and dry.
But we, you know what,
Well,
we
not
actually appointed
necessarily.
somebody into that position first, if you recall, because you were actually on the board when we did that.
But she has background.
That's right, exactly right. So in other words, we had an opportunity to appoint somebody into a position, and first we looked for them to have qualifications for that position.
My issue is different than theirs. So
Right, but I'm
my
just saying,
issue
but
is
she
she
that-
wasn't
looked-
elected,
But I'm just
right.
saying, originally, we appointed somebody into the position of receiver of taxes because there was a gap and between, elections, and we had an opening. And when we did, we looked for somebody who had qualifications, who was a CPA, who had who was financial literacy background, basically, and who was very good with numbers. We wanted to know that somebody who, understood, loans and taking money and accounting, and that was very important, and that was something that the town board looked for. We and found somebody, and then again, that person was endorsed by the voters when voters went to the poll. We actually did the same thing for when we had an opening on our town board. We looked for somebody who we felt had qualifications, and we interviewed lots of people, and then the town board made a decision, and then that person happened, Jackie, I'm happy to say, has been doing a great job, and she was endorsed by the voters recently in an election. So, again, you know, there's
But they
opportunities.
got to be endorsed by the voters, and that, for me,
Right.
I don't believe that you can't find qualified people to hire to do jobs. I believe you could hire a qualified receiver of taxes as an appointed position. I think my concern is that that particular position should be an independent position, and in each of the scenarios that you provided, they had to be elected by the people. And if the people didn't think that they had the qualifications and didn't like them, then they wouldn't.
They had,
So-
right, they had to be elected by the people, but they had been appointed in
With
that.
Kim's position.
Say it again?
In my opinion, you elect the town board and the supervisor, and they should fill the policy-making positions in departments for the town government. If you're not happy with how the highway department is performing, or the clerk's office, then you elect new town board members or a new supervisor. But if you go up and down the street and ask 100 people at random if they know or care who the town clerk is or who the receiver of taxes is, I'd be surprised if you find two. And what happens when you have elected officials who are not at the top of the ticket, you're just as vulnerable to having basically who has the most friends and family get elected. Whether they are good at their job or not, whether they're honest at their job or not. We saw what happened with the neighboring fire chief. So having
But the fire
having
chiefs-
democracy on that scale, I think isn't really productive. And we can have accountability from the board and skills and training, supervision from the board to people who are professionals. You don't elect the parks department head.
Is that the foreman?
Or a police chief.
Or the police chief, or a lot of other things.
Can I ask a question about independence? Because I understand the positions as being largely functionary and in conformance with, you know, state law or Board of Elections and county law. What's the nature of the independence that you speak of that helps me better understand? Because I don't know what the challenges are
Being
between.
asked to forgive penalties, being
That wouldn't be a
asked.
violation of the law, that's criminal.
It may be, but when you are elected separately, you may have the ability to stand against versus if you are hired by the person who then, I'm not saying they don't do that. I don't know who's gonna be the town supervisor 5 years from now. But I know some of the people who were before, and not your previous, or, that's not true. Things have happened. People have been asked to do things. And if if that's not your boss, and your boss, and you don't have to tell your boss that you won't do it, that's different than when you're elected by the people and you have some
Leverage.
protection
Yeah.
because you do get to say, these are laws. It's a lot easier to
Yeah.
say these are laws when you are protected.
I don't have any skin in the game, but to play devil's advocate, what I don't understand is if I am elected and I don't have and I only have this
You don't have
amorphous
the
public to
oversight.
answer to, then maybe I'm just as likely to be corrupt.
Well, but it
as-
doesn't work that way in our office. You cannot do just whatever you want as the receiver of taxes or the town clerk. You still do have to answer to your town supervisor. There could be friction, but they don't just get to do whatever they want. There is connection between those offices, but there's enough independence to create. Now listen, change is hard, and maybe, there's something to it. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm asking some questions. It seemed to me, that was my initial reaction. Could I be educated on it? Sure. Can we talk about it more? Sure. But my initial reaction was, where did this come from? Because I never heard about taking out these these positions as being elected. I was suspicious of the fact that my rights are being taken away. And then what about this relationship and how does that work? And what is it, what are we doing it for? You say you get to do it for the ability to kind of
You can merge some
Do
departments or
things.
merge the choices that you have.
I also have a suspicion because I like to know what's coming out in the end game. And if I don't know what the end game is, then I'm going to be asking lots of questions. I already don't understand what's happening with the highway superintendent. I'm not even fully against it. I just don't even understand it. I don't even know what we're doing. I don't know how we're saving the money. I don't know if we're taking it away from elected, but we're appointed somebody in there anyway. What are our differences here? Because I don't need to do that to share a salt shed.
Isn't this kind of like the starting of all
Yeah.
of this?
It is.
Yes, you had your
I think it's
people, and I didn't fill out the form, but like this is another aspect of it. And I would assume that you're going to have some town hall meetings at your governmental meetings to talk about some of the changes. And by the way, we just passed some election law reforms up in Albany, which means that if somebody is the highway superintendent position up this year?
Yes.
All right, so petitions are going to go out at the end of February
Yes.
for that job.
I know, actually, I have a new question as a result of that, which is that if in fact the public were in support, and one of the things that we would be thinking about, obviously, would be to take this to public referendum, because that would be required
Right, you have to do
to
that.
get rid of these elected offices. And I'm curious now, because this was not an issue until very recently, with changing the elections, if we would still have the opportunity to do so. So potentially, we could put up a public referendum. We had been thinking, potentially May, if again, if we had felt that the public was in support of this or wasn't not in support of it, and we would go out to the public for a vote. So we were thinking about, again, something like May, so that we would then not get in the way of primaries in September. And then
No more
November.
September primaries.
Right, so knowing that,
Right?
so, but here's the question, and Sandy, you may or may not have the answer. Would, in fact, we be able to pair this up, with the primary election? If again, we had public interest, could we have a referendum at the same time as a primary election? We may not have a primary for any of those offices, but we would have to have petitions in, so presumably somebody would be running for the elected offices of highway superintendent and clerk. Those are the ones that would be up, and they would have to have submitted their petitions. But if we had a vote in June, would that be okay to then not have them on a ballot in November?
I would assume that you could put a referendum like that on at any time, couldn't you?
Yes,
I
that's
have to check on this,
that's
but it
a-
seems like
yes.
you can put it on at any time. It's
Right.
not about a primary, because this is not about a primary, it's just a
Right.
referendum.
Right.
So would the Board of Elections allow you to have it on at the same time as the primary in June? I would think so, but we
Yes.
don't know that yet.
Right.
But you could also have it, usually it would be on in November. In the past, it would have been on in November.
Well, other
Most
municipalities,
likely.
I think North Castle recently had a referendum to get rid of one of the, I can't remember, if it was clerk or receiver. Receiver, thank you. So they got rid of their receiver taxes elected, and they did it as a separate election.
Like a January or something, I mean, whatever it was.
Right,
Yes.
March or,
Money.
right, yeah.
So you
Again,
might want
it does cost money, and we knew that, that was a possibility, and that's something that we have potential
Not
to
a lot
get
of money.
some money from the state also to help offset from. But again, the question is, if not could we put a referendum in June, but if we had the referendum in June, would we be able to eliminate the election in November for those offices, even though we're in the same election cycle?
Well,
That's
maybe
my question.
nobody will run, so you might
Well,
not
they
have
have
to
to
eliminate.
have somebody run, because what if people don't eliminate the position?
Depends
They
on the
have to.
wording.
What if somebody
Yeah.
isn't going to run? I mean, if the highway superintendent isn't going to run,
Somebody.
the clerk is not going to run.
Right, but I mean, so
There
so
must be a
theoretically,
serious
say
test.
people decided they were
We have
gonna
to find
run,
out
but there was no
legally.
primary for those positions. I'm just saying theoretically,
Right,
right?
right.
Hypothetically, whatever. Hypothetically, somebody's not, there's no primary for those positions. Somebody's decided they've submitted their petitions, they're the only ones to submit a petition, and there's no primary. Could they then, could the state allow us, or the county allow us to eliminate the position from November ballot? I don't know the answer.
We don't know
This
the
is a
answer
question
yet.
I'm
Right,
going to put to our
right.
state elected
Yes,
official,
we have to
see if
get
she can get an
legal-
answer for
legal
us about
people.
this, because this is a new problem that's sort of arisen with the question of this opportunity that we think we may have.
You can also have people run on the basis, I went to Cadoza Worthy's funeral, and a terrific gentleman from Ossining, and he had run for, treasurer of the village of Ossining. And he ran on the basis that you shouldn't run, and that position should be a professional position. So he ran, and then as soon as he won, they turned it into a professional position. I don't remember whether we had to do, I don't know what happened in the village of Ossining back then, but so you could have maybe people that would run on the basis that if this referendum passed, that they would turn it into a different kind of office. It's very intriguing. Yes, the timing would have been easier to do this before.
Oh, hindsight. Everything's funny. Everything takes time, unfortunately, and we wanted to have an iterative process, and we wanted to make sure that the public was engaged in a process, and we have tried to do our best to reach out to the press and alert them to this. I know that a couple of the local newspapers have run stories about the initiative, and
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 10 minutes. If you have any items you wish to check out, please bring them to the circulation desk now.
Yes.
The library will be open tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Thank you and have a good evening.
And I just want to say thank you to everybody who has come out tonight, because I think I very much appreciate the input. I think the board very much appreciates the input. We specifically videotaped this so we could post it on YouTube and make sure that we get additional input, and we're hoping that we'll get, again, additional written responses. But we do feel like the next step would be, unless we have a huge uproar and say this is a ridiculous thing, and I'm talking huge, very big uproar. We do think that the next step would be to start to hold a public hearing about a referendum to eliminate these elected positions. And if we don't have all of the answers about exactly how we're going to have the next step, we think that that's okay, because we're going to get, again, public input about how the public thinks the best process would be to fill those, and then listen to the public and try to incorporate the input that we receive into moving forward in the best way possible. So that would be our next step. Michael, is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of the additional public engagement?
Only to the extent that it's now going to be time, I think, for the town board as a whole, as an elected body, to sponsor public engagement. And so that means maybe a little bit more specificity that we offer to the public, and the public offering in return what its thoughts are before getting to that point of scheduling.
This is a town board sponsored event, I will say. This is one of them. Our town board sponsored survey and mailing that went out to the public, and we will continue to take feedback, and again, we'll direct people to watch the YouTube videos and hopefully get a little bit more information about any questions that they have, and then we'll continue to take questions, and then hopefully we will have more action steps coming up in the future. Thank you again to our public, to all the participants who came out today, and we look forward to getting additional feedback, and we will hear more from the town board in the near future. Have a great night, everybody.